A lot of fail or trial and error 이런 말을 사용할 수도 있지만 this is my recommendation. I've had my fair share of failed attempts. It kind of sounds poetic when you make it like this, right? I've had my fair share of failed attempts. Failed attempts is, of course, 실패한 경험. Now, fair share literally means, well, I've, had many attempts. And of that many attempts, there were a couple, points where I definitely came across bad restaurants. 이런 의미에서 fair share of failed attempts라고 사용하실 수도 있어요. Altogether, you could say, but I've had my fair share of failed attempts. Repeat after me one last time. I've had my fair share of failed attempts. Failed attempts. The key word, of course, is failed attempts. And the next speaker says, 음식도 형편없고 서비스도 별로 좋지 않았습니다. Yeah, sometimes when you come across a blog and go visit a restaurant without proper review, you may come across these problems. 음식도 형편없고, the food quality is terrible. 서비스도 별로 좋지 않았습니다. The service quality was terrible as well. Or you could use different vocabularies. The food was awful and service was unpleasant. Or you could change it around. The food was unpleasant and service was awful. And they both mean the same thing. So you can switch the adjectives that describes the service and the food around. The food was awful and service was unpleasant. And how does he respond? 저도 그런 경험 있어요. You're definitely not alone. 저도 그런 경험 있어요. I've had that experience too. 경험은 experience죠. Very simple. I've had that experience too. So let's continue on to the screen and see what the next speaker has to say. 그런 식당은 다시 가고 싶지 않습니다. You never want to go back to a place where it has bad food and bad service. That's horrible. What do they have to offer? 다시는 가고 싶지 않다. Never ever. I never want to. 돌아가고 싶지 않다. 이미 가봤던 곳이잖아요. 다시 돌아가고 싶지 않은 거기 때문에 go back 라고 하시면 돼요. I never want to go back to what? 그런 식당. 그런 is literally such, right? So it's really easy. It's exactly what you're thinking probably. Such a restaurant. Now, there's many ways to interpret this, but this is, I think, the simplest way to approach it. So again, I never want to go back to such a restaurant. And he responds, 맞아요. She agrees, I'm sorry. And there's many ways to say this. Oh, you're correct, you're absolutely right. But my different recommendation is, I'm right there with you. 맞아요라는 답은 여러 가지 표현법으로 사용할 수 있는데요. Another recommendation is, I'm right there with you. 당신과 똑같은 생각이에요. 거기에 같이 있어요. 이런 뜻이에요. I'm right there with you. I agree with you. 이런 뜻이죠. So repeat after me just twice so you take away this from the lesson. I'm right there with you. I'm right there with you. So how about the next tweet? 식사 맛있게 하세요. Now they're saying bye to each other. 식사 맛있게 하세요. Have a good meal. 또는 have a decent meal. Any synonymous words that means good will do. Have a good meal. 마지막으로 감사합니다. Literally, thank you, right? Thank you. But we've been saying thank you very often throughout this dialogue. So how about thanks again? Thanks again to close it off. Thanks again. So we are totally ready to listen to the whole dialogue together. I hope you're able to follow along, listen carefully, and see what we've created.
I'm in Jongno with a friend from abroad right now. Could someone please recommend a good restaurant in the area? I'd love to take advantage of Twitter's strength here.
How does temple food sound?
Wow, that's an unconventional recommendation. That works out perfectly because my friend and I enjoy greens more than meat. But don't we have to visit the temple to taste temple food?
There's a lot in this city now. In fact, there's one in Jongno as well.
I should definitely try it out. Thanks. By the way, it seems like you have a lot of information on good restaurants.
Nah, I just try out different venues after reading about them in blogs. But I've had my fair share of failed attempts. The food was awful and service was unpleasant.
I've had that experience too. I never want to go back to such a restaurant.
I'm right there with you. Have a good meal.
Thanks again.
Now that we've gone through an entire dialogue with different expressions, let's go ahead and take a closer look at one specific expression and see how we can apply it to different contexts. 사찰 음식은 어떠세요? Now remember that we said you can ask how about temple food? How about temple food? But a different way, of course, we went over is, do you remember? How does 사찰 음식은 temple food 들리세요? Sound. How does temple food sound? And this means the same thing as how about temple food? So one more time. 사찰 음식은 어떠세요? How does temple food sound? And we can apply this to many different contexts, but here's a second example. 저녁을 먹고 영화 보는 것은 어떠세요? 자, 저녁을 먹고 영화 보다. 미국 문화에서는 이걸 같이 이렇게 붙여서 쓰는 경우가 많아요. Because it's a very common form